After I drink this coffee, I am going to make reishi tincture. Reishis are good for helping the immune system, and they're adaptogens, which means that they help the body kind of be more resilient to stress overall and can help improve cognition and energy levels. If you're just getting started making tinctures and you're not really sure where to begin, I've made a guide with 6 simple tincture recipes that are perfect for summer. They're using ingredients that are all growing right now, like calendula flowers and nettles. All the recipes take you step by step through the process of making the tinctures, and so it's a great guide for beginners. Make sure to check that out in the description below. I'm running low on glass jars at the moment to steep my tinctures in, and I don't want to pay a fortune to buy more mason jars. Here in the UK, they're obscenely expensive. I know they're less expensive in the US and in Canada, but here for like 12 jars, it's about 50 pounds, which is like 70 US dollars, 65 US dollars. It's crazy. So I decided to save a few glass jars from some food that we had bought recently, and I'm going to wash those out and reuse them to make tinctures in. I'm going to start to do this as a habit so I don't have to keep buying mason jars. I saved a little Tabasco bottle because I thought if I can figure out a way to get the tincture into the bottle, it would be a great bottle to have a tincture in because it only lets little drops out at a time, and so it would be a bottle that would kind of dose itself. I'm not sure if it'll work, but I'm going to give it a try. I'm using dried reishi mushrooms to make this tincture, and I got mine from a place called Merit Mushrooms, which is like a small mushroom producer in London. They sell a bunch of different kinds of dried mushrooms, but I also saw that they sell growing kits and mushroom mycelium and spawn, which is something I'm really wanting to get into when we have a bit more outdoor space. I'm using dried reishis to make this tincture for 2 main reasons. The first is that fresh mushrooms have a lot of water content, which can slow down the extraction process and also make it more likely to spoil. Fresh mushrooms also take up a lot more space in your jar, and so you'll be able to get fewer into the jar, and that will make a weaker tincture. So if you're foraging your own reishis and want to use those, I just recommend that you chop them up and let them dry before making this tincture. I would also avoid using mushroom powder if you can. I know that you can find reishi powder online, and I've made a lion's mane tincture with lion's mane powder before, but honestly I wouldn't do it again. It's really difficult to properly strain off. For mushroom tinctures, you tend to use a dual extraction method, which means that you extract the mushrooms in both alcohol and water, and that means that your final tincture has a higher water content in it. And because of that, I wouldn't recommend using mushroom powders to make tinctures because of how difficult they are to strain off. Especially when you have more water content in your final tincture, you really want the plant material to be removed from the tincture as much as possible, and powders make that really difficult to do. So if you can get your hands on dried mushrooms, dried reishis, dried lion's mane, I would recommend using that above powder. The reason that we do a dual extraction with mushrooms is because most mushrooms have beneficial compounds in them that are better extracted with either alcohol or water. Some of the compounds can be extracted using alcohol, but if you only use alcohol, you miss out on some of the compounds that are better extracted using warm water. And so when you do both extractions, then you maximize the nutrients in your final tincture. So the first step that we're going to do in this tincture is the alcohol extraction. I'm using a pint jar to do this part, and I'm going to fill it about 1/3 of the way full with my reishis and cover them with an 80 proof or above alcohol. I usually use unflavored vodka to make my tinctures, but I'm out of it right now. And I had this on my shelf and I don't think I'm going to drink it, so I'm going to use it to make this tincture. I'm going to pour it over the dried mushrooms and then add a lid and give it a shake. Then I'm going to top it up a bit more with alcohol to make sure everything is covered. I'm going to top it up again the next day after the mushrooms absorb some of the alcohol, because when you first cover dry plant material with alcohol, sometimes it doesn't fully sit under the alcohol, but if you give it a little bit of time, like a day, the plant material absorbs the alcohol, and then if you top it up with a bit more alcohol, everything is below the alcohol. I would recommend adding a date and labeling it so you remember what it is and when you made it. And then normally you would let this sit about 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks in a cupboard or somewhere away from direct sunlight. I'm doing it faster to show you this whole process. But when you make it, make sure that you let it steep for about 8 weeks. While I let this steep for a little bit so you can begin to see the beautiful color that this tincture will be over time, I'm going to show you some clips of our garden, which is very wild at the moment. I have mentioned a few times I haven't had much luck at all growing food this year, but the flowers have done okay. Now I'm going to strain this tincture off, and I'm going to use cheesecloth, but you can use a tea strainer, a coffee filter, a French press, a fine mesh strainer, whatever you have on hand. And when you have the alcohol tincture strained off, then you can just set that aside. Now I'm going to add the same reishis into a pan, and I'm going to fill the glass jar that the alcohol tincture was in with water. I'm going to try to get it about the same amount of water as I had alcohol in the jar. And add that to the saucepan. Then I'm going to gently heat the water until it almost simmers and let it sit in that heat just below a simmer until about half of the water evaporates. And once that happens, you just want to let it come down to room temperature. Now I'm going to strain off the mushrooms again, and they can be composted at this point. And then I'm just going to combine the alcohol tincture with the water extraction and bottle it. In terms of dosage, you don't want to take reishi tincture for an extended amount of time, but I like to take about a dropper full a few times a day when I have a cold or if I need an energy boost. I like to take it under my tongue, but you can add it to a morning coffee or tea to kind of get your energy going in the morning as well. Because this tincture has so much water in it, I do like to consume it faster than most alcohol-based tinctures and like to consume it within a year. If you are into tinctures and want to learn more about them, consider joining my newsletter. I send out one email a week with very simple tincture tips, recipes, and information about how mushrooms, herbs, and flowers can benefit our bodies and can be used in tinctures to promote our overall health. I'll leave a link to where you can subscribe down in the description. Thank you for stopping by, and I will speak to you in the next video.